Hello, I'm Maria Ressa. With us today on Talk Thursday is Akbayan Representative Walden Bello. He is the chairman of the House Committee on Overseas Workers Affairs. In June, Bello exposed an alleged sex for flight scheme where embassy officials promised repatriation to overseas Filipino workers in exchange for sexual favors. On Tuesday, Akbayan joined 7 victims in denouncing what they call a possible whitewash by the Foreign Affairs Department and the Labor Department. Bello will talk about the developments and the probe on this alleged scheme. Thank you for joining us, Representative Bello.
Thank you very much, Maria, for inviting me.
Tell me exactly what you found.
Well, the start of this whole thing was when the press, the media, specifically one of the reporters of DCRH called me and said, had I heard anything about the sex for flight case in which embassy officials allegedly were promising tickets back home to people, to OFWs who would sort of engage in sex with them. And so I said I hadn't heard about it, but let me check. And then I called up my sources in the Department of Foreign Affairs and in the Department of Labor and Employment. And what they came up with was not just cases of sex for flight, but a wider issues of sexual manipulation, sexual harassment of overseas Filipino workers, women, in a number of embassies in the Middle East. Specifically, they provided me with information, including documents on one individual belonging to the DFA staff in Syria who was caught in a compromising incident in a poolside with one OFW, and this was a violation of the non-fraternization policy of the DFA, and this was the latest of a series of incidents in which he had harassed OFWs. We were also provided with the name of the assistant labor attaché of in Jordan, Amman, Jordan, who was allegedly basically peddling as prostitutes in the evenings our people in the shelter.
Yes.
And then also the name of an individual connected with the embassy in Kuwait who was also doing the same thing, basically running a prostitution ring. So the fact that this came from whistleblowers within these two agencies, the DFA and the DOLE, and the fact that these were individuals of strong credibility, this is what led me then to bring out, including the names of the individuals that were named.
Did you verify them independently? Were you in order to name them, you had to have been sure.
Yes. This was verified with our sources within the agencies themselves. Now, the reason that we were so confident in bringing this out was because these were people who are people of integrity, who were quite upset at what was happening and the bad name that what they called these bad eggs were bringing to DOLE and to the DFA. And this was the reason why, when I asked them, started my investigation, they immediately leaped at the opportunity to, in fact, come out with these names and to, in fact, confirm that these things had been happening.
And how were you reacting to the way it's being handled now?
Well, as soon as we made the revelations, the Secretary of Foreign Affairs, Mr. Del Rosario, as you know, came to my office.
Yes.
And basically said that this is our data, this is your data, and they seem to correlate at some points. And he called, all the ambassadors together from all the Middle East posts, and I was invited to the meeting, and there were 13 individuals and names that they came up with that was read by Mr. Del Rosario. And I was promised a copy of that. Now this was about 5 weeks ago.
Yes, yes.
And ever since that meeting, despite repeated requests, I was not provided with that document. So I was really now getting worried that there was a stalling that was happening. In terms of the Department of Labor and Employment, they came to my office and said that, well, we'll send people to the Middle East and we'll have names and we'll have the results of investigation in 2 weeks' time. This was Acting Secretary Chato at that time. So I have a great respect for this. The individuals here involved, including Secretary Baldoso.
Yes.
I expected that there would be an investigation that would move. But despite that, and 5 weeks, 6 weeks had elapsed,
Yes.
Nothing was provided to my office, despite the fact that please give me an update on what was happening, because the public is extremely concerned about this. When I did not receive that, that's when we called a press conference in where we presented new witnesses.
Correct.
And 2 hours after that press conference, or 3 hours after that press conference, the document arrived in my office, which detailed the actions taken or to be taken against 13 individuals.
Yes.
2 from the DFA and
11 from
11 from
Labor.
Dole.
Yeah.
So, but it took a press conference to force that from the DFA. Nothing came from the Department of Labor. One day after, I received a very short note from the Dole, which was very confusing, basically saying that we have not identified organic officials connected with Dole, but we have identified certain local hires, and that some of these people have already been terminated, which I worry about, because if you have cases like this, which are
Yes.
criminal in nature, you should really make sure that you keep the accused within your agency and not allow them to escape.
Yes.
Because we're talking not only about administrative sanctions, but criminal charges. And it was out of this frustration of no movement that I asked Secretary De Lima to please come in and have the DOJ and the NBI step into this process. And they have moved in. And they are now carrying out their separate investigation
And
of this case.
what are you told? How long will that take? When do we expect to see results?
Well, we do not have any word yet from the DFA on exactly when they're finishing their investigation. We also do not have word, despite the promise of, within 2 weeks they would have news with us 2 weeks after June 18. We still do not have word from the Dole on when they'll be finished with this. They're saying that they're finishing up the reports. The National Bureau of Investigation, which we have asked to investigate these cases as well as other cases, we do not have word also on when that will be terminated. All I know is that aside from those 3 agencies, the Senate Blue Ribbon Committee under Senator Gingona, after a privileged speech by Senator Estrada on the case, last a few days ago. We'll be holding hearings, and once we've constituted the Committee on Overseas Workers Affairs, we'll be holding hearings also at the House. This will all happen within the next 3 weeks.
So if this is a symptom of something wrong inside the system, what does it show about the dangers to overseas foreign Filipino workers now?
Well, it shows several things that we have a lot of distressed OFWs, and in the Middle East.
The Middle East is a tough,
is a tough place. I mean, we're really talking about a high probability of being sexually abused in households in Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia only abolished slavery in 1962, and the tendency is still to look at maids, domestic workers, as chattel, as slaves. And so I went there back in 2011 when I first assumed this, and we documented, how terrible the cases were for Filipino workers and the high probability of sexual abuse. Now you have this, so there's, because of the maltreatment and abuse, many escape these households.
Yes.
And
they become more vulnerable when they do that also.
Yes, they go to the shelter, and then when they go to the shelter, instead of finding a refuge, they're finding officials that, prostitute them.
Who take greater advantage,
who act as pimps. And
yes.
So you have a really terrible situation. I mean, we're talking about, this is pretty bad in Riyadh. It's pretty bad in Amman, Jordan, where they're let out by the former labor attaché, Mr. Antonio, at 11 at night. It's very bad in Kuwait. It's very bad in Al-Khobar. You actually have a situation whereby shelters have become prostitution centers, and
it's that widespread, you would say.
Yes, I would say so. And what people said after we began our investigation is that this had been going on for some time.
Yes.
And so for me, when I first assumed office and headed up the Overseas Workers Affairs, my focus was to look at the abuses being carried out on Filipino nationals in residence of those countries.
Yes.
Saudis, by Kuwaitis,
yes.
And that was shocking enough.
Yes.
Okay. And at that time that I was investigating this and getting data, little did I know that it was in fact our own countrymen who were doing the same thing to our compatriots.
Yes.
So you have a very, very rotten system, and you have a situation whereby you have shelters. Some of them are within the embassy compound, some out of the embassy compound. You have male labor and assistant labor attachés, and then you have male, for the most part, welfare officers.
Yes.
And I think you create a very, very volatile mixture, especially once you have unprincipled individuals that take care of the shelters.
Yes.
So this is really, really very problematic.
What do you want to see happen?
Well, several things. One is that yes, we do have to operate shelters, but we need to really clean them up. And one of the measures, of course, although there's no guarantee, is that we should no longer have male labor attachés, assistant labor attachés, and welfare administrators. Of course, that's no guarantee, but certainly I think it will help to reduce it. The second thing that I would like to see happen is that we really have embassy officials, the ambassador, really have a hands-on approach, because we cannot have a situation where the ambassador is only theoretically head
Correct.
And if you ask them, did you know what was happening? They say, well, I'm sorry, but I didn't know, which is the case with some of our ambassadors.
Yes, yes.
That's not an excuse. They really ought to be able to do that. Now, the problem here is the dole, the labor, seems to exist as an autonomous kingdom within the embassy setup. And I think that some of our ambassadors, I think, are willing to live with that, because I think they also are are afraid
And don't want responsibility necessarily, right? For it,
So
yeah.
we really need a real organizational shake-up at this point in time in terms of our posts, especially in the Middle East. But we really need to look at that in Asia too, in Southeast and East Asia.
I think part of it in the Middle Eastern countries and in Saudi Arabia in particular, the cultures are so different, and maybe some of the OFWs, the women, aren't aware of what they're walking into when they go into
Yes,
these
well,
homes.
that's also the other thing that we really need. The what is called the PIDOS, which is the orientation
Yes.
seminar, should really tackle real problems
Yeah.
instead of being, of giving what are a tourist kind,
Yes.
touristic view of what they're happening. They should be told, okay, these are the probability of being abused. You go into a household there, chances of being raped are very
Yes,
high.
yes.
I mean, these are the kinds of things. Or
Reality checks.
reality checks. The problem is
Yeah.
that some of them find it out for themselves, in a terrible way. Like
Yes.
when they run away, and they're supposed to surrender themselves to the authorities if they
Yes.
want help.
And then the authorities.
And then the police, the Saudi police, would be the first to rape them. And and then after that experience, if they get to the shelter, then they also are used by all sorts of people that are connected with the embassy. So if you heard the stories
Yes.
of our witnesses who come from Al-Khobar,
Yes.
about how people connected to the embassy, most likely as local hires, basically make them sex slaves, and then after they're tired of them, they get a new set. So these are Filipinos themselves doing
Yes.
this. So
Yes.
it's hopefully these investigations and these hearings will just expose this whole thing and bring about the very necessary reforms that we need in the Middle East at this point.
Are you happy with the way DFA tackled this problem after what you showed?
No, I think that the fact that they would not give this report to me even after Secretary Del Rosario promised it, and the reason that they gave was that they were worried about the legal complications that it might bring them from the people that were accused. Oh, this is a no-no. I mean,
Yeah,
I can't.
yeah, correct.
Secondly is that I think what we really need here is to make sure that DOLE and DFA do not just get the lower level officials like the drivers,
Bring it. Yes,
but
correct.
bring it up to the ambassador itself, because although an ambassador might not be involved at all, it's no excuse, because
Who is accountable, basically?
who is
what you
accountable?
want. Yeah.
I mean, if we're talking about individuals being penalized, lower levels terminated, or having criminal penalties against them, then there should at least be some sort of administrative liabilities for the higher ups, because they're supposed to be the ones who maintain a clean post. And if they can't do that, then they leave the service.
So you said you'd be taking this in Congress. I mean, lawmakers will be involved in this. What will you do? I mean, what do you want ideally for the lawmakers to come out of this with?
Well, I think first of all, I think it would be very important to have the predators, in fact, penalized. We do not just want administrative sanctions. We want the appropriate agencies to bring criminal penalties or criminal charges against these people who were involved. And pressure from Congress would really be very important. Secondly is I think that it would be very important for Congress in its oversight role to be able to make strong recommendations to the executive on how to reform the system of organization of our shelters and our embassies in the Middle East. And thirdly, I think we really need to look at again the the laws governing our overseas deployment, so as to be able to really plug some of these holes that allow sexual predators to get away with things. So there's a lot that Congress could really do at this point in time.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. We've been speaking with Akbayan Representative Walden Bello on the alleged sex for flight scheme in the Middle East. He has a list of prescriptions. Keep track of what's going on and keep the pressure. I'm Maria Ressa. Thanks for watching Talk Thursday. We've been hearing about this for